This week on Jerusalem Dateline, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas curses President Trump and says the U.S. is no longer part of the peace process. We take an in-depth look at the future of U.S.-Palestinian relations and the fate of the peace process. Plus, the Trump administration begins to pull the plug on aid to UNRWA. What does this UN agency do? And why do some believe it harms both Palestinians and Israelis? And how one Syrian baby found hope in the midst of a civil war. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas launched a scathing attack on President Trump and Israel. In a speech to the PLO's Central Council, Abbas effectively buried 25 years of the Oslo Peace Accords. John Waggy has more on the verbal attack and reaction from Israel and the U.S.
During his rambling address, Abbas declared the Oslo peace process dead, cursed the House of President Trump, and rejected any role for the U.S. in brokering a Middle East agreement. He also called the nation of Israel a colonial project of Western nations that has nothing to do with Judaism. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu learned of Abbas's remarks while in India. He wasn't surprised.
He has revealed the truth. He has torn off the mask and shown to the public the simple truth that I have been working to instill for many long years. The root of the conflict between us and the Palestinians is the steadfast refusal to recognize the Jewish state in any borders whatsoever.
During a midweek speech in Cairo, Abbas continued his attack, calling Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital sinful. His fury was also sparked by the White House decision to freeze part of U.S. funding for UNRWA, the UN relief agency created nearly 70 years ago for Palestinian refugees only. Critics say that agency should be abolished so one UN commission can take care of all refugees.
Joining me to talk more about U.S.-Palestinian relations and the developments in the Middle East is Julie Stahl, our CBN Middle East correspondent, and John Waggy, our CBN senior editor. John, you just did that story on Mahmoud Abbas. How significant is his speech, and what does it mean for U.S.-Palestinian relations?
Well, I think it's quite significant, actually, because there's no turning back after a speech like this, after you basically say there's no room for U.S. negotiations and the U.S. cannot be a mediator anymore. That leaves you with little room to maneuver. So he has really thrown down the gauntlet to the U.S. government. I think he's bitterly disappointed at the change from the Obama administration to the Trump administration. And also, I think we don't hear it come through as much, but I think he's also very angry with nations like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, some of these Arab nations who are saying, look, it's time for a new era in the United States diplomacy, right, and in the whole Middle East diplomacy, and we need help against Iran, the Shiite nation.
Exactly.
And so we're going to side with the United States and even Israel, as opposed to doing that with the Palestinians. And so I think Abbas is feeling a little bit lonely right now, in spite of the votes in the UN that go, 200 nations for the Palestinian resolutions and 9 for the United States. The reality of the power structure is a lot different, and the United States is charting a new course here.
And one thing he did in the speech we were reading about an Islamic expert that said the curse. He actually cursed the Trump household, and he said this was like one of the worst curses you can do in the Arab world.
And they tried to backtrack. His spokespeople tried to backtrack and say, he was just being sarcastic.
Right.
That's not sarcastic from everything I know of the pronouncement of the curse.
Right. And Julie, from an Israeli point of view, I know Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was in India. He reacted to his speech, and he said basically it took the mask off of Mahmoud Abbas. And what he had been saying for years, that it's really they fail to recognize a Jewish state.
Yeah, basically that's it. I mean, what the Israelis said was that this shows why there's no peace. There's no peace partner. Across the board, left and right, Israelis reacted very strongly against what Mahmoud Abbas said. I mean, of course, there's a split within Israel about what to do next. The other option is maybe just ruling over them and not making them citizens. One of the education minister, Naftali Bennett, his idea is to have like cantons where they rule themselves, or emirates.
Right.
They rule themselves in the major population areas, and and then Israel has overall security.
For those of us who have covered, the Middle East for decades, back from the Oslo Accords, this is really kind of a new world order, sort of. Things are changing and breaking up. Do you see it that way as well?
Definitely. This is it's a pivot point. I mean, I can remember 25 years ago when Oslo was signed, and many people were aghast because what did this mean? And all the time looking like it was a deal, going to be a deal, and thinking, oh, this is not a good thing, this is not a good thing. And now it looks like it's really finished. It's breaking down. Yeah. What we're going to have next, we don't know, but it looks like this phase could be finished.
John, we've talked about this before. Before President Trump was elected, we talked to Lance Wallnau. He talked about Trump being a political wrecking ball. And do you see this as well here in the Middle East as well?
Absolutely. He is upsetting the order like it hasn't been upset in decades and decades. This is the end of the peace process. Mahmoud Abbas was supposed to represent the moderate face of the Palestinians to the entire world, whereas Hamas explicitly says in their charter, no more Israel, from the Mediterranean to the Jordan River. So now, after billions of dollars invested in the Palestinian Authority, we've got a situation where even the Arab nations seem to be stepping away from the Palestinian Authority, and he's left essentially by himself saying, we will march on Jerusalem in a peaceful way. And who knows how it's going to shake out next. Because you've also got Iran, which doesn't want to see the steps to an agreement that Donald Trump wants and Prime Minister Netanyahu says he wants. They want an agreement that leads to peace, and Iran does not. And so how are they going to intervene in all of this too? Many, many, many questions left.
Exactly. And one of the questions, and quickly, Julie, Vice President Mike Pence is going to be here in just a few days.
He is.
What do you anticipate for his visit?
Well, from the Israeli side, a lot of goodwill. From the Palestinian side, as of now, they're not planning on meeting him. They're pretty bogus with him. But I would imagine that it'll be a pretty upbeat visit.
Yeah, I would expect so too. We'll look forward to that. Well, Julie, John, thanks for your expertise. We've covered this for many years and anticipate many more things and new developments coming up in the next few months and years. Thank you. Coming up, they call it Camp Jihad. See what it means for the future of Palestinians. The Trump administration announced it would freeze $65 million for UNRWA. That's half of what it usually gives. UNRWA stands for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. Here's a story we did several years ago that we believe is still relevant today. It addresses who this UN group is, why it was established, and how U.S. taxpayers may have helped pay for the facilities where lessons on jihad have been taught.
فلسطين عربية من المي للمية.
This clip comes from a 20-minute documentary exposing summer camps that encourage Palestinian children to violently take back their homes from Israel. The film also points to a connection between these camps and the United Nations. While these camps were not sponsored by the United Nations Relief Works Agency, or UNRWA, they were held at UNRWA facilities. Some say that makes the organization just as guilty.
لكن نيجي بنقعدهم انه انت ايش بلدك ايش بلدك ايش بلدك.
احنا من حيفا. من يافا.
في بصير انتماء اكثر للطفل. يعني بصير الاطفال هنا يعني احنا ما بيخلي يعني حتى الان صار الولد عند الطفل او البنت انه صارت كثير متشوقه ترجع لبلدها الاصلي المعروف الممول اللي الأونروا.
Filmmaker David Bedeen also points out that this UN agency is funded by the U.S. taxpayers and international community.
The director of UNRWA was in our office several years ago and explained that everything happening in the UNRWA facility goes on with the permission and authorization of UNRWA.
واحنا على البحر قاعدين مبسوطين احنا والعيله وجايبين الناس على البحر، اجى الديب. ومين هذا الديب؟ اليهود. صح اليهود ديب؟ شو عملوا لنا؟ شو عملوا اليهود فينا؟ طرونا وشردونا وقتلونا وطخوا أهالينا.
UNRWA takes care of millions of Palestinian refugees. In fact, the Palestinians are the only refugee group with its own separate UN agency. A spokesman told CBN News that UNRWA was not involved in the camps.
It isn't an UNRWA summer camp. It has absolutely nothing to do with UNRWA.
Further investigation shows that UNRWA allowed a third party to use the facility for the camps. Israel says UNRWA is still responsible.
They acknowledge that this happened, and they've discontinued relations with a third party who was using their facilities.
Foreign Ministry spokesman Paul Hershen says the West and the world should still be concerned.
And it's not the first time it's happening in UNRWA facilities. Even if it's not UNRWA itself who's doing it, you know, it's my money and your money. It's taxpayer money that's funding them, and you would think that perhaps they would be able to vet the organizations that they are allowing into their facilities.
UNRWA does not get money from the United Nations. It gets money from 38 democracies. The leading ones are the United States and the European Union.
At the end of the day, this kind of violent brainwashing is not helpful to anybody.
Up next, a good news story from the Middle East and how some are saving a child's heart. Despite the contentious issues of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, UNRWA, and the nearly 7-year Syrian civil war, some good things are happening in the Middle East. Here's a story we've done about how Israel is saving lives and saving a child's heart. Meet Niaz. She's nearly 2 years old. She looks healthy, but without life-saving heart surgery, she wouldn't live for long. That diagnosis came from doctors who saw Niaz in the Syrian refugee camp, where war forced her to live. The decision to take her little girl to Israel was not an easy one for her mother. Due to fear of possible repercussion, we hid her identity.
First, I was afraid of the thought of coming here. But after some thought and discussion with my husband, we decided it was worth it for the surgery.
It was a perilous journey. Niaz and her mother fled the Syrian war zone to northern Iraq, then made their way through Jordan and into Israel for treatment. This opportunity is a result of the work of Shevet Hakim, which finds and helps at-risk kids throughout the Middle East. The Christian outreach group serves as a bridge between the Muslim world and the Jewish state.
You know, we're grateful for the opportunity that the Lord has given us to partner, to be that middle, to be those people who can go places that the Jewish doctors can't go. People who can go places that the Muslim families can't go. We have been granted the opportunity to go to all the corners of the world and to bring a message of peace and of love.
They work together with partners such as Save a Child's Heart and hospitals like the Wolfson Center in Tel Aviv. They provide life-saving surgery for children, often from places that consider Israel the enemy. Dr. Lior Sasson co-founded the program 20 years ago.
Maybe people will call me naive, but I think dealing with the Palestinians and patients coming from enemy's countries, and they know what we did for their child, and it put everything in new perspective. It seems that we are not the monster that everybody wants to draw us. I think it's like trust-building steps.
When Niaz arrived, doctors gave her a grim prognosis.
She already had damage to the lungs. This makes the surgery even more difficult because it makes it with higher complication rates.
As Niaz's mother prepared her little girl for surgery, doctors scrubbed up for an operation they knew would be challenging.
Niaz has a rare heart defect. She has a hole between her two major arteries. Right now, doctors are trying to close that hole, but it's complicated because the surgery ideally should have been done more than a year ago.
The surgery took several hours, required a team of surgeons, nurses, and technicians with state-of-the-art equipment. Shevet Hakim volunteers stayed with Niaz's mother as she waited and hoped for a miracle.
It seems successful. There was a big hole between the two arteries coming out from the heart, the aorta and the pulmonary artery.
Following the surgery, a team worked on Niaz for days until they could analyze the full extent of the procedure.
So what we see right now, what we saw in the echo following surgery, is although she came late, the results were amazing.
Care provided throughout the ordeal made a huge impact on Niaz's mother. For many, it's like a Middle East peace plan.
We experience fear, hesitation, distrust even of the Israeli doctors, sometimes of us. And what is really a blessing is seeing that distrust turn to love, seeing the fear turn to confidence, and seeing these kids' lives saved, and also seeing their parents and their families, their viewpoints radically changed for the good.
Knowing that nobody else would do it, and the patient will die if we will not be doing the surgeries, and to see the patients recovering, it's beyond any description.
Niaz survived her surgery and headed back to Syria with a new heart.
I'm very happy. I'm very glad. I thank all the Jewish doctors that treated our daughter, and I got good treatment from all the staff here. And also Shavat Akim, who brought us here to the hospital.
She goes home with a scar that will serve as a reminder of a much brighter future.
She will have a normal life. She can do sports. If her genetics is, then she can go to the Olympics. She can get married and have children. She can go to university first. She can become a doctor, whatever. Her prognosis right now is that of a normal child.
What would have happened if she didn't have the surgery?
She would have died. She would have died in infancy, not in adolescence or an adult. She would have died in infancy.
Up next, a look at the history and heroes of Christian Zionism and their role in modern Israel. When the Palestinian Authority president addressed the PLO Central Council, he condemned the role of Christian Zionists like England's Lord Balfour in the establishment of the modern state of Israel. But here in Jerusalem, there's a state-of-the-art interactive museum that celebrates Balfour and other Christians who played a major role in the formation of today's Jewish state. Take a look.
The museum greets visitors with a profound introduction, stunning aerials of Israel, while a map traces the land given by God to the 12 tribes, all set to originally scored music. The museum uses state-of-the-art technology. For example, this area is one of the largest touch panel exhibits anywhere in the world. Touch one of these panels, and you can find out more information about Christian Zionists throughout history. The modern features like video mapping aim to tell new audiences one of the most compelling and often unknown stories about modern Israel, the role of Christian Zionism. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressed this history in a 2012 speech.
I don't believe that the Jewish state and modern Zionism would have been possible without Christian Zionism. I think that the many Christian supporters of the rebirth of the Jewish state and the ingathering of the Jewish people in the 19th century made possible the rise of Jewish Zionism.
American Mike Evans built the museum to spread the word of Christian Zionism's place in history.
Wanting a home for Christians to celebrate their heroes and their history. I found no place in Israel where Bible-believing Christians can go to, and they have heroes and they have history.
The museum is based on years of research and this 2-volume set written by Evans.
There's so many of them. I mean, if you just take George Bush, 1844, this guy was a Hebrew professor, and he wrote a book that sold 1 million copies on the restoration of Israel. And yes, his 2 relatives were U.S. presidents.
Others, like Ord Wingate, formed the first Jewish fighting unit in nearly 2,000 years, the beginning of the Israeli modern army we see today. Women like Corrie ten Boom and her family. The Nazis killed her father and sister, and she suffered in a concentration camp because they hid Jews during the Holocaust. And Swedish diplomat Raoul Wallenberg faced death to save Jews.
In the dead of winter, Wallenberg joined the thousands of Jewish prisoners in the death marches to Auschwitz, trying to save anyone he could.
What was it that to face death. I realized, number one, it was their Bible. They had an intimate relationship with the living Lord, and they loved the Word of God, and they were willing to commit their life for it. And with the Word of God came promises to the Jewish people.
Those scriptural promises are woven through the exhibits, from Ezekiel to Isaiah to Abraham.
According to the ancient writings, one day God appeared to Abram and spoke the words that would give birth to the nation of Israel.
For visitors, the experience is wow.
It's an experience like no other. I mean, you go in there and it's interactive. You'll learn a lot of things that you probably never even learned.
I thought this was one of the most impressive things I've seen in Israel in the time that I've been here.
Many never knew the history and now want to tell others.
I am going to tell everyone that I can think of, people in my synagogue, to come here to see how this beautiful land of Israel was not built just by the Jews, but by the Christians and the wonderful people who risked their lives to make us a homeland.
For Evans, the museum lets the Jewish people know that although enemies surround Israel, they're not alone.
They see Auschwitz and what they went through, and they see the alienation in the world today, and they come through it and they say, we're not alone. There's Christians who really love us. And it's just amazing to see that. It gives me hope. I'm not alone. That's enough.
If you come to Jerusalem, I'm sure you'll love to visit the museum. That's all for this edition. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And please watch for our upcoming coverage of Vice President Mike Pence's visit to Israel. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.